to echo with peal upon peal of those awful roarings that I have described, each of which ended with a dog-like yelp of pain. "You have hit him, Baas," said Hans, "and he isn't a ghost, for he doesn't like it, but he's still very lively." "Close up," I answered, "and hold out the spears while I reload." My fear was that the brute would rush on us, but it did not. For all that dreadful night we saw or heard it no more. Indeed, I began to hope that after all the bullet had reached some mortal part, and that the great ape was dead. At length, it seemed to be weeks afterwards, the dawn broke and revealed us sitting white and shivering in the grey mist. That is, all except Stephen, who had gone comfortably to sleep with his head resting on Mavovo's shoulder. He is a man so equably minded and so devoid of nerves that I feel sure he will be one of the last to be disturbed by the trump of the Archangel. At least, I told him so indignantly when at length we roused him from his indecent slumbers. "You should judge things by results, Allan," he said with a yawn. "I'm as fresh as a pippin, while you all look as though you've been to a ball with 12 extras. Have you retrieved the Kalubi yet?" Shortly afterwards, when the mist lifted a little, we went out in a line to retrieve the Kalubi, and found—well, I won't describe what we found. He was a cruel wretch, as the incident of the herd boy had told us, but I felt sorry for him. Still, his terrors were over, or at least I hope so. We deposited him in the box that Komba had kindly provided in preparation for this inevitable event, and Brother John said a prayer over his miscellaneous remains. Then, after consultation and in the very worst of spirits, we set out to seek the way to the home of the Mother of the Flower. The start was easy enough, for a distinct though very faint path led from the clearing up the slope of the hill. Afterwards it became more difficult, for the denser forest began. Fortunately very few creepers grew in this forest, but the flat tops of the huge trees meeting high above entirely shut out the sky, so that the gloom was great, in places almost that of night. Oh, it was a melancholy journey as, filled with fears, we stole, a pallid throng, from trunk to trunk, searching them for the notches that indicated our road, and speaking only in whispers, lest the sound of our voices should attract the notice of the dreadful god. After a mile or two of this we became aware that its notice was attracted despite our precautions, for at times we caught glimpses of some huge grey thing slipping along parallel to us between the boles of the trees. Hans wanted me to try a shot, but I would not, knowing that the chances of hitting it were small indeed. With only 3 charges, or rather 3 caps left, it was necessary to be saving. We halted and held a consultation, as a result of which we decided that there was no more danger in going on than in standing still or attempting to return. So we went on, keeping close together. To me, as I was the only one with a rifle, was accorded what I did not at all appreciate, the honour of heading the procession. Another half mile, and again we heard that strange rolling sound which was produced, I believe, by the great brute beating upon its breast, but noted that it was not so continuous as on the previous night. "Ah," said Hans, "he can only strike his drum with one stick now. Your bullet broke the other, Baas." A little farther, and the god roared quite close, so loudly that the air seemed to tremble. "The drum is all right, whatever may have happened to the sticks," I said. 100 yards or so more and the catastrophe occurred. We had reached a spot in the forest where one of the great trees had fallen down, letting in a little light. I can see it to this hour. There lay the enormous tree, its bark covered with grey mosses and clumps of a giant species of maidenhair fern. On our side of it was the open space which may have measured 40 feet across, where the light fell in a perpendicular ray, as it does through the smoke hole of a hut. Looking at this prostrate trunk, I saw first 2 lurid and fiery eyes that glowed red in the shadow, and then, almost in the same instant, made out what looked like the head of a fiend enclosed in a wreath of delicate green ferns. I can't describe it. I can only repeat that it looked like the head of a very large fiend with a pallid face, huge overhanging eyebrows, and great yellow tushes on either side of the mouth. Before I had even time to get the rifle up, with one terrific roar the brute was on us. I saw its enormous grey shape on the top of the trunk. I saw it pass me like a flash, running upright as a man does, but with the head held forward, and noted that the arm nearest to me was swinging as though broken. Then, as I turned, I heard a scream of terror and perceived that it had gripped the poor Mazitu Jerry. who walked last but one of our line, which was ended by Mavovo. Yes, it had gripped him and was carrying him off, clasped to its breast with its sound arm. When I say that Jerry, although a full-grown man and rather inclined to stoutness, looked like a child in that fell embrace, it will give some idea of the creature's size. Mavovo, who had the courage of a buffalo, charged at it and drove the copper spear he carried into its side. They all charged like berserkers except myself, for even then, thank Heaven, I knew a trick worth two of that. In 3 seconds there was a struggling mass in the centre of the clearing. Brother John, Stephen, Mavovo and Hans were all stabbing at the enormous gorilla, for it was a gorilla, although their blows seemed to do it no more harm than pinpricks. Fortunately for them, for its part, the beast would not let go of Jerry, and having only one sound arm, could but snap at its assailants, for if it had lifted a foot to rend them, its top-heavy bulk would have caused it to tumble over. At length it seemed to realize this, and hurled Jerry away, knocking down Brother John and Hans with his body. Then it leapt on Mavovo, who, seeing it come, placed the copper socket of the spear against his own breast, with the result that when the gorilla tried to crush him, the point of the spear was driven into its carcass. Feeling the pain, it unwound its arm from about Mavovo, knocking Stephen over with a backward sweep. Then it raised its great hand to crush Mavovo with a blow, as I believe gorillas are wont to do. This was the chance for which I was waiting. Up till that moment I had not dared to fire, fearing lest I should kill one of my companions. Now for an instant it was clear of them, and steadying myself, I aimed at the huge head and let drive. The smoke thinned, and through it I saw the gigantic ape standing quite still, like a creature lost in meditation. Then it threw up its sound arm, turned its fierce eyes to the sky, and uttering one pitiful and hideous howl, sank down dead. The bullet had entered just behind the ear and buried itself in the brain. The great silence of the forest flowed in over us, as it were. For quite a while no one did or said anything. Then from somewhere down amidst the mosses I heard a thin voice, the sound of which reminded me of air being squeezed out of an india-rubber cushion. "Very good shot, Baas," it piped up. "As good as that which killed the king vulture at Dingaan's kraal, and more difficult. But if the Baas could pull the god off me, I should say, 'Thank you.'" The "thank you" was almost inaudible, and no wonder, for poor Hans had fainted. There he lay under the huge bulk of the gorilla, just his nose and mouth appearing between the brute's body and its arm. Had it not been for the soft cushion of wet moss in which he reclined, I think that he would have been crushed flat. We rolled the creature off him somehow, and poured a little brandy down his throat, which had a wonderful effect, for in less than a minute he sat up, gasping like a dying fish, and asked for more. Leaving Brother John to examine Hans to see if he was really injured, I bethought me of poor Jerry and went to look at him. One glance was enough. He was quite dead. Indeed, he seemed to be crushed out of shape like a buck that has been enveloped in the coils of a boa constrictor. Brother John told me afterwards that both his arms and nearly all his ribs had been broken in that terrible embrace. Even his spine was dislocated. I have often wondered why the gorilla ran down the line without touching me or the others to vent his rage upon Jerry. I can only suggest that it was because the unlucky Mazitu had sat next to the Kalubi on the previous night, which may have caused the brute to identify him by smell with the priest, whom he had learned to hate and killed. It is true that Hans had sat on the other side of the Kalubi, but perhaps the odour of the Pongo had not clung to him so much, or perhaps it meant to deal with him after it had done with Jerry. When we knew that the Mazitu was past human help and had discovered to our joy that, save for a few bruises, no one else was really hurt, although Stephen's clothes were half torn off him, we made an examination of the dead god. Truly it was a fearful creature. What its exact weight or size may have been we had no means of ascertaining, but I never saw or heard of such an enormous ape, if a gorilla is really an ape. It needed the united strength of the 5 of us to lift the carcass with a great effort off the fainting Hans, and even to roll it from side to side when subsequently we removed the skin. I would never have believed that so ancient an animal of its stature, which could not have been more than 7 feet when it stood erect, could have been so heavy.